Okay, we've got another edition of the Political Mic. This week, I'm so excited to have the panel that I do have tonight. This is a rock star panel for sure. And I'm going to go ahead and start introducing the panelists right now. So with me tonight, I have Mr. Nate Honore. Nate Honore graduated from Oakland University, my alma mater, with a Bachelor of Arts degree in law and political science. He's a law student at Quinnipiac University, and he has a passion for human rights. So, Nate, thank you so much for being here tonight. Cassandra Knopf. Cassandra Knopf is a rising 3L at Howard University School of Law, like myself. She's passionate about politics and justice from a young age, and she began engaging in the civil process by writing for the president to protest the Iraq invasion at age 8. Recently, this translated into a passion for human and civil rights law, and specifically environmental justice. Cassandra has interned with Representative Sharice Davies office on Capitol Hill, currently works for an environmental nonprofit based in Maryland, and has secured a fall position at the Environmental Protection Agency. She's excited to bring her energy to the legal profession. Cassandra, thank you so much for being here tonight. We're excited to have you on. Amethyst Jefferson Roberts. Amethyst Jefferson Roberts, born and raised in Compton, California, is a rising 3L at Howard University School of Law. Amethyst's passion for fighting against systemic racism has guided her to become a public defender, to fight on the front line of indigent defense. Amethyst also plans to be a social engineer, advocating for equity as an elected member of the Compton School Board, the City Council, and continuing that agenda until she is representing California as a United States Senator. She lives her life by the African proverb, Utunu, meaning I am because we, and because we are, therefore I am. Amethyst, it's such an honor to have you here tonight. Thank you for joining. Christopher Johnson. Christopher Johnson is a proud native of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He is an alumnus of Oakland University as well, where he had earned a bachelor's of arts degree in pre-law with a concentration in political science. Christopher currently serves as the district office chief of staff for Pennsylvania State Representative Joanna McClinton. Previously, he served as a Capitol Hill intern with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation in Washington, D.C., and interned with the 2016 Democratic National Convention Committee in Philadelphia. He is also a former field organizer for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. Chris, thanks so much for being here tonight. Your insight is going to be, I know it's going to be good, so thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Ariana Patton. Ariana Patton is a rising 2L at the Thurgood Marshall School of Law. As a native of Ellenwood, Georgia, Ariana began her political journey her senior year of high school, where she had the opportunity to intern for the late office of Congressman John Lewis. After interning for John Lewis, she remained in the political field by receiving her BA in political science from Spelman College and obtained internships with the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, Planned Parenthood Public Policy Division, Coca-Cola, Toyota Government Affairs, and L'Oreal USA. Ariana currently has a political Instagram account, The Black Girl Politico, which I encourage you to go ahead and follow, that educates her followers on the political process. Ariana hopes to one day become a member of Congress. And last but not least, Mr. Shaquesti McCall. Mr. Shaquesti McCall is a very distinguished guest of mine tonight, and I'm so happy that he's on the panel. He is a lifelong resident of Florence, South Carolina, and a graduate of Francis Marion University, class of 2015, where he majored in political science. While at Francis Marion, he was awarded the Jesse A. Cole Political Science Scholarship and the Dr. Neil D. Thigpen Award in South Carolina Politics and Government. While at Francis Marion, he also served as the president of the Francis Marion College Democrats and chairman of the P.D. Young Democrats. He was later appointed by the South Carolina Democratic Party to the voter protection pool for the PD region in 2014. After graduating from Francis Marion, Shaquez obtained his Juris Doctorate degree from Carolina Central University School of Law. And while in law school, he served as a staff editor for the NCCU Law Review and was chairman of the NCCU Law Democrats. Currently, Shaquez is the owner and managing attorney of the McCall Law Firm, located in Florence, South Carolina. And as of June 9th, 2020, he is currently the Democratic nominee for Florence City Council. So, Mr. McCall, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Without further ado, let's get right into it. So, recent polling has, for instance, the Morning Consult poll has Biden leading the incumbent president, President Donald Trump, 51% to 43%. This seems to have been a trend that has increased since the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak has worsened and the death toll has risen since February. So even when you look at the specific state polling, in Pennsylvania, for instance, I believe there's 39 Trump, 51 Biden. This is the widest gap, the widest margin that's ever been during this election cycle so far. This pattern is seen in other crucial swing states, such as Ohio. Ohio, he's actually leading by one, such as Wisconsin, Florida, even Texas. Trump is only leading by 1%. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this question out to the panel. Do you think that this trend is likely to continue, or do you think that we're just in a high watermark for Biden? A lot of folks have made the comparison with the 1988 campaign when Dukakis in the summer was well ahead of George H.W. Bush, and George H.W. Bush managed to overcome the Democratic challenger, Mike Dukakis, and defeat him. I'm going to go ahead and start out with Chris, since your experience working in recent campaigns in 2016, working on the Clinton campaign, and I know you were very active in on the ground politics. Do you see similarities? Because I remember polling even back then that it had Hillary Clinton up. It wasn't by the same margin that we're seeing today, but should we be more weary or cautious?
Well, first, Mike, I want to say thank you for allowing me to join this very distinguished panel. And I'm so grateful for you to be able to open up this platform and creating this dialogue as we're facing the most important election in our lifetimes for many of us. And so I just want to thank you for, in this critical time, creating critical discussions amongst us all together. But I will say this, today, if you are on the Joe Biden campaign, if you are Joe Biden, you're in good shape. I think that you are feeling really good about the state of the race at the moment. I think that America has shown itself to be, at least at the moment, wanting to fire who's currently occupying the office for a number of factors. One, we have a pandemic that has swept across this country and across the globe, but particularly here in states all across the country, but particularly in battleground states like you named in Pennsylvania, Texas, Georgia. The pandemic has been hitting citizens hard, and folks are looking to the White House for leadership, and it hasn't been there. And as a result, lives are being lost. We see an economy that is battered and broken. And I think that people are saying that we've got to turn the page in 2021. And so I think at the moment, Biden's in good shape. He's reached about 51%. That's like the highest, or that's the ceiling that we've seen so far, which is actually a few percentages higher than the ceiling that Hillary Clinton ever reached in 2016. So there are some really good indicators that if the election were to be held next Tuesday, Joe Biden will win. But there is a chance that polls may shrink. They may tighten as we head into the final months of this campaign, the final 90 days or so, when Biden has to name a running mate who may give him a boost or may cause voters to have questions. But I think that also if Trump can find a way to sharpen his message on the economy and start to become a little bit more disciplined, which is a problem he's had for most of his career or professional life, then he might have a fighting chance. But today, I think that Biden's in good shape.
Yeah, and I like what you mentioned in terms of the messaging, because the messaging, the Democrats this year actually have more of a message, it seems, than they did in 2016. Hillary Clinton's message, I mentioned this on the this broadcast about 2 weeks ago, was more so, she's ready on day one. And so being the candidate for the party that was already holding the White House, she was the incumbent. And so it wasn't strong or effective for the incumbent to come out with a message like that in a year where it seemed like it was a year for change. Cassandra, I want to get your thoughts on, because I know you're also engaged in the political process, especially in Capitol Hill and everything. Do you think that this is a high water mark, or do you think that this is a change year again due to the controversy of police brutality? We've also got the COVID-19 pandemic raging, and rather than things getting better, it seems as if things are getting worse because the Trump campaign, in addition to what, as Chris pointed out, having no message, it seems, to really frame Biden as a reason not to vote for him. It seems as if they're contradicting the CDC, they're contradicting the medical community, and they're encouraging people not to wear masks. There seems to be more of a focus to get people in these packed arenas to continue life as usual, have these Trump rallies. And do you think that this would come back to haunt them in November?
First of all, thanks for having me on this panel. I enjoy talking about these things a lot. So I think there's a long answer and a short answer. I think the short answer is yes, it's going to bite them. Yes, I think especially in like local and state elections, it's definitely going to affect the way that people view the Republican Party. They really threw their hat in with Trump early on, and they really stuck to it even through impeachment. Mitt Romney was the only member of the Senate who was a Republican who voted for impeachment, which he knew was not going to do anything, but at least he made sure to project like, this is not something that I endorse. But generally, the Republican Party has consistently and repeatedly failed to do any of their job to check the president. My concern, especially going back to the polling and this idea that we're pulling ahead, I think that that's a good thing. It's a good indicator. But the fact of the matter is we haven't done any real legislation. We haven't done any real investigation. We haven't done anything to pay attention to the election interference that happened to us in 2016. And I think that was very purposeful because the people in charge of that would have been the Senate. The Senate being Republican-led, they have an actual vested interest in not protecting us from voter interference. And then we know that there have been issues with voter accessibility and that there are barriers that are being erected willfully or, maybe not, but we see between the lines. So I want to be optimistic about this November election. I think that the consensus of the population generally is that Trump has failed miserably as his COVID response. But will that be reflected in the election results? I can't with confidence say that we're going to see something that's truly reflective of what we as citizens want to see. And that concerns me a lot.
Right. And I like the fact that you had mentioned the undertone behind all of the, election news is the fact that there was still foreign interference in 2016. And there was nothing to put that foreign interference in check to prevent that from happening again. And we're seeing it again in this election cycle. And there was multiple news outlets reported that Mark Meadows seemed to encourage foreign interference in this election process. I'm interested in getting your thoughts, Amethyst, on whether you think we're headed to another 2016 scenario where things seem well for the Democrats, polling is where it should be, but we're not paying much attention to foreign interference, and that comes to haunt the Democratic Party or the outcome of the election.
Just like everybody else, thank you for having me here today. I apologize. My nephew is in the background living his best self life. But I agree with both Chris and Cassandra. I think that we definitely are going to hopefully not be surprised at the end of November and have a new president. But also I am concerned with the fact that we're not going to be protected as voters as far as foreign interference. Because honestly, for just normal people, that's a big black hole that we don't even really know much about. And so I'm just hoping that we can all go out and vote and make sure that we get a new president. But am I hopeful? Because I watch a lot of videos and people be out here still supporting him after the death tolls here, after all of the racist comments he's made, and people just do not care. They're just like Trump crazy. So I hope and I pray, and I will be on these battlegrounds fighting for a new president, but we won't know until it's over.
And Ariana, I'm interested in getting your thoughts too. I know both of us, we had the opportunity to work under the CBCF in 2018. And that year was interesting because at the end of the year, we saw a midterm sweep for the Democrats. So we saw a lot of people actually engage in the political process. And it was actually much of a high watermark. And when you compare that midterm election with other midterm elections, usually midterm turnout is very poor, especially among African-American demographics and other minority groups. Do you think that this election, the factor of foreign interference would come into play, and that people won't really be as engaged when you also take into consideration COVID-19 concerns and other things that people have in terms of going out to cast a ballot, deadlines for mail-in ballot?
Yeah, I think I'm very hopeful. I'm hopeful that, like everyone else, I'm very hopeful that we are not surprised that we will have a new president. I'm really not sure about foreign interference right now. I think the thing that I'm most worried about is the voter suppression tactics, and I think in Georgia it's heavy because especially within the Black communities. I know within my personal community, Ellenwood, Georgia. Big shout out to them. That there was like a lot of polling issues, where there were only, 3 or 4 like actual, I forgot the names of it, but where you were actually able to vote, and people were waiting in long lines. People had to go to work, and I think that the pandemic has a big thing. Oh, polling stations, thank you. And people had to go to work, and so I think that took a major toll on voting. But as you see, there was still a good turnout. People were still actually able to go out and vote. I think that right now is the best time I guess everyone now is more so focused on politics because there's nothing else to distract us. We see it, it's right in our face. There's nothing to, we don't have any like sports distractions. We don't have like major TV shows. We don't have anything to truly distract us. So we're more so focused on, what's going on in the world. And the pandemic is playing a big role, seeing how Trump is handling the fact that we've only received a $1,200, check, how a lot of the, major businesses are receiving, kind of, I guess, payouts, and how, there's like things that's going on in the economy and how our people are struggling. They actually just stopped, they cut the $600 unemployment payments. And now they're thinking, and I know we're going to talk about this later on, but now they're thinking about cutting it to $200. Who can live off of $200 a month? Or $200 a week. I'm sorry. So I think people are really focusing in on this and seeing, okay, Trump said that he was going to do this. He said he was going to stimulate the economy. What's going on right now? Why are people dying at fast rates with COVID-19 when he had the plan to actually, fix this problem, or not even fix it, but to, I guess, to like bring it to a normal rate, in comparison to other countries. So hopefully, we have, hopefully we are able to get Biden in. I hope people, really take it seriously, and not write anyone in on the ballot. So.
Yeah. And while you're thinking, I was thinking about, members of the media mentioning that the GOP hopes to have an October surprise this year in the form of some kind of vaccine for COVID-19 relief to ensure that, Trump looks like he's on top of this crisis again, to quench fears, to quench insecurities about his leadership. And so, Mr. McCall, I'm interested in your take on whether or not you think, the pandemic, people's fears and contacting this virus would come into play, or would the fact that people have been secluded for such a long period of time, like Ariana pointed out, would that result in people paying even more attention to not just the presidential election, but also elections down ballot, Senate elections, congressional elections like the one you're running in for city council in Florence, South Carolina?
Yeah, definitely. And again, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. Can you all hear me still?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, again, and thanks for having me as well, Mr. Taylor. But again, I honestly believe that this pandemic is something that we all know that we'll probably never witness again in our lifetimes. And I can attest to, on a local level, when I was running at the primary, is understanding that this pandemic changed the game. Local elections oftentimes doesn't get the same type of attention like national elections do. But I think what helped spark the momentum for a lot of local elections and a lot of elections overall was the George Floyd incident. So looking back at where we're at now, we're maybe like 96 days away or something like that, days away from November 3rd. Polling numbers are, although they're optimistic for the Democratic Party and for Joe Biden at this time, I am also I'm also a pragmatist myself, and I know it's very, very, very early. And I think I do believe this though. The more the conversation is about the pandemic and about the economy, I think we as Democrats have a way better opportunity to win in November. Because again, we all know that this is a referendum on the president. This election is definitely a referendum on the president. And the economy typically drives that discussion. And here we have an economy, I think today had the largest contraction as far as the economy. It was like maybe 9% or so. So long as I don't know how Trump can rebound other than driving down Joe Biden unfavorables. That's what I think he's going to tend to do. I think he already knows he's going to lose the popular vote. He don't even care at this point. He's going to lose the popular vote. He knows that. So he's only caring about battleground states. And in those battleground states, what he's going to do is he's not trying to earn no new votes. He's just going to try to drive down Joe Biden's unfavorables. And I think hopefully Joe Biden's VP pick is someone that can help energize the base that if Biden do say something crazy, which he's known for saying sometimes, he's able to bounce back for it. So I know I was all over the place, man, but I hope I kind of answered your question.
Yeah, and as we were talking, I was thinking of the fact that Trump seems to also want to play up, his being the law and order candidate. I remember he called himself the law and order candidate during the RNC in 2016, and there's some undertones to that because there's parallels between, I think, this year and 1968. 1968, of course, was a year where there was a lot of social unrest, there was a lot of uncertainty, and there was a lot of insecurity with the incumbent holding the White House. And Trump seems to embody all three of the major candidates in 1968 because you had Richard Nixon promising law and order, you had Hubert Humphrey, who was the incumbent, and you had George Wallace, who came with George Wallace in terms of race baiting and all these things. Because remember, recent days, he has claimed that Joe Biden is a threat to suburban America. He is someone who is trying to play on fears in it, and it's not. I don't know how you can take anything out. I don't know how you can take that in a different context. But a Pew Research poll from July mentioned that 41% of Americans said violent crime is a big problem in America, and that's compared with 58% who say that the coronavirus outbreak is a big problem, and 63% who say that the ethics in government is a big problem. And then a Gallup poll showed that 3% of Americans say crime is the most important issue facing the country. Only 3%. So Nate, do you think that, in light of what the priorities, according to the polls, are for most Americans, do you think that this is something, playing up the law and order theme? Do you think that's something that would work to Trump's benefit or not?
I would say kind of not, actually. So far, we've seen Trump play up the law and order, and it hasn't really worked. We've seen all of this happen, and Trump's polling numbers have either stayed the same or he's seen them gone down as Biden's go up. And that's because we're in a completely different environment than what we were 4 years ago. 2016, really, to me at least, was more of a perfect storm where you had a policy-focused campaign on one hand that didn't really connect well with ordinary people, where the candidate was kind of that inner circle of American politics and I guess the social elite as well, while the challenger was this person who could excite the masses but not as policy heavy, but had an easier time connecting to people. But now 4 years later, Trump can't run as the outsider when he's the sitting president. I think, and because that because where we are as a society has changed, Trump's strategy has to change. And we're seeing that Trump is having a very difficult time running against someone who isn't a woman, someone who isn't a minority. So even when he tries to attack Biden, he's not going into Biden specifically. He's saying it's the Bernie Sanders agenda, it's the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez agenda, it's the Ilhan Omar agenda, because he doesn't know what to do with Biden. Even with the unrest, even seeing Biden's weakness among more progressive factions of the Democratic Party, we see that everyone is pretty much locked in. We all agree we have to get Trump out, and then we'll worry about the rest later. So I don't think law and order has really worked.
Yeah, and as you were thinking, I was thinking about an argument or point I made to a lot of friends of mine, folks who engaged, even today, actually, Facebook debate, as to, why should we settle for Biden? Lesser of two evils, all these. So the question is, or the point I made to them is, you have in Biden someone who's not, you may not have him take a far left position on a lot of issues, like student loan forgiveness, like, a lot pertaining to the economy and on a lot of different, kitchen table issues. You may not have him as far left as you want him to be. But as you mentioned, Nate, being that, most of my experience with the Democratic Party has been with the Southern Democratic Party, the Democratic Party in North Carolina and in Alabama, I kind of knew that it's going to be a hard sell if somebody like a Bernie Sanders was at the top of the ticket, because you'll have to convince people in the middle and people who don't even traditionally vote Democrat but held their nose and voted for Trump because he wasn't. Remember, he kind of hijacked the Republican Party. They were not expecting there to be a Trump candidacy, going into 2016. So they went with him because, according to them, on their social conservative issues, he was more in alignment with their interests than Hillary Clinton. And my question to them was, do you think that those folks would be won over 4 years in, them now comfortable with the idea or notion of Trump as president, and familiar with it? Do you think that they would have continued to have doubt and enough doubt to cast a vote for another extreme, another polar opposite, Bernie Sanders? And I personally just didn't see that happening. Chris, I'm interested in getting your take on it. Do you think that that was a valid argument, or do you think that is, it's not fair, or, you never know? I know, for one thing, the folks I was hearing in the internships I had down in North Carolina, the DA and everything, there's already comparisons with Sanders and AOC and the squad. So they're already making this a Trump versus the squad race. I'm interested in hearing your take on this.
Yes, I do know that's the new attack that Trump is trying to land on Biden. Is calling him, basically, he is a tool of the left, and trying to prop up AOC and others who they view to be problematic for middle of America or suburban America, however you want to frame it. But it doesn't work because, first of all, Biden has been around in the public space for decades, and people know his record, people know where he stands. And I think that it's hard to kind of dupe America into believing that he's something that he isn't. I also think that the most important question, and this is what I'm quoting David Plouffe, former campaign manager for President Obama, used to say. He said, if you ask a question between two candidates, you ask a question, which candidate will fight for you? If you ask 10 people in a room between Donald Trump or Joe Biden, it could be Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders. If you ask 10 people in a room, which candidate will fight for you? Just a simple question. If you aren't winning that question 7 out of 10 times, if Trump is not winning that question 7 out of 10 times, or if Biden is winning that question 7 out of 10 times, then that gives you a better chance of understanding who's going to win. Usually it's those simple questions around who's going to fight for you, who has the best message, who has the best record to show that they have your interests in mind. And I think that that's a losing question for Trump right now, just looking at the state of the country, looking at the state of the economy. And as you mentioned earlier in the question of law and order, I think that it's so interesting that someone who, like Trump, who lights himself on fire every day as an entertainment piece, can also try to find himself to be the firefighter. You can't light yourself on fire every day and then say, well, I'm the person that can fix it. You can't be the person that creates unlawfulness at the congressional, at the executive level, being impeached, and then saying I want to be the law and order president. It just can't work. And so he's not going to be that. He's not that candidate. And I'm hoping and I believe that America will understand this and do all that we can to shift the narrative and move into a new direction going forward.
Yeah, and as you were talking, my mind was already brought to a few weeks or a couple of months ago, I believe, late May, when Trump used, custom border agents to throw tear gas at protesters in Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C. For what appeared to be a photo op. I know a general that helped organize that incident came out and apologized for the role he played in ensuring that took place. And then we're seeing him, there seems to be a flashpoint in this election because he kind of did the same thing in deploying these agents in Portland, Oregon for protesters. He mentioned or floated the idea of deploying them in Chicago, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Ariana, do you think that all of these incidents of him using, Border Patrol, and keep in mind, even today, in President Obama's eulogy for Congressman John Lewis, he made a stark comparison with George Wallace and Trump in that both advocated for using federal agents, law enforcement, to quell protesters, those who were advocating for expanding the electorate, those who were on the side of John Lewis. And if anyone wants to take the position that John Lewis wouldn't have been on the side, look at his record. The man he had given blood on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and he was doing that so that folks could have the right to vote. Ariana, interested in getting your take on this.
Sorry. Can you just repeat the question?
Oh yeah. Do you think that the incidents of Trump deploying these agents, the use of federal law enforcement to quell protests, basically take the polar opposite position than those who are advocating for Black Lives Matter, those who are protesting against the incidents of police brutality, such as the one that took place in May, the one that took place with the guy who was jogging. Do you think that these incidents would help or hurt President Trump's electoral chances in November? Sorry, can you hear me? No? Can you hear me now? No. Okay, well, while we're working on that, Cassandra, if you can weigh in.
I think it's because if there's multiple mics on at a time, we can't hear Mike. Yeah. Okay, so your question is whether or not this law and order essentially is going to help or hurt Trump. Is that the
right? Because I heard folks say, when there's a lot of confusion and social unrest, people, now I disagree, but they said that they tend to vote Republican. When there's a lot of confusion, when there's a lot of social unrest, when there's a lot, uncertainty in the country. And when you take into consideration the role this administration's played in what seems to be a complete opposition to the Black Lives Matter process, of course, they'll say, oh, we're against the violent protests. And they would try to portray the protests as all violent, as opposed to the majority of peaceful protests that have been taking place. Do you think this would help or hurt his chances in November?
I think the tactic itself has the potential to help him in November if, there's a certain segment of the population who already supports him. And those are also the portion of the population who have a lot to lose if essentially their idea of their supremacy is lost. I feel like that's really the only core value that really resonates with people, even if they don't want to admit that to themselves. So if those are the same people who are hearing these messages about violence and law and order that needs to, quell these protesters, they're going to be convinced, one way or another, because they already were presupposed to believe that. But that being said, I don't think that, the same tactics that worked in the 1960s are necessarily going to work now, because we have access to the internet, we have access to Twitter, we have people on the ground, sending video of protesters singing songs, wearing t-shirts. It's much harder to like push a singular narrative when everyone has the ability to be a cameraman and a reporter. So I think if we take everything into stock, the fact that everyone is locked at home because of COVID, an avoidable disaster that is now enveloping our country, people are upset about it, and it contributes to every single other civil unrest that we have. So I think that I hesitate to even say benefit, because I don't want to say that this disease was necessary at all. But one of the things is we all have a common stressor right now. I think people are generally a little more willing to have some empathy for others just because we are all experiencing one very similar thing. And maybe, this is my hopeful note, that will extend towards this understanding that we do live in a society that was built on racism. We have the society that was built specifically to keep certain people in power. We have the system that we kind of allowed the president to have a lot of these powers based on a promise that he'll never do anything wrong with it. And now we see that was a really bad idea. So I think this is a key turning point, and it's possible that people are better in their nature and are more empathetic, and that will lead to something better. I can't 100% say that will happen, but I have hope. That's my bottom line.
And Ariana, are you able to hear now? Can you weigh in?
Yeah, sorry, I can hear. I think I don't think that his tactics will get him reelected. I think if anything, it's helping Biden more so. I just remember I was looking at an article today with CNN, and they were talking about what's going on in Portland, Oregon. And I remember reading that the mayor, Ted Wheeler, he was saying that he didn't want. I can actually read it right now. He said that we did not ask the feds to be here. We do not want them here. They're not helping the situation. They're not appropriately trained, and we're demanding that they leave. So it's showing there that if anything, it's worsening the situation, which shows that I guess that the chaos that the controlling that he's trying to cause, he's trying to get the citizens under control and I guess help him in the polls. It's not working because it's making them even more upset. Once you have that passion ignited, there's nothing to die it down, and unless you make that change. And right now, we're mad about police brutality. We're mad about defunding how the government is defunding education, but funding police officers. We're upset. And there's nothing that's going to change that. So if anything, if Trump wants to get reelected, which I doubt will happen, he needs to listen to what's really going on and try to find ways to help.
Yeah, and thank you. And I was remembering a statement made by, as you were speaking, Ariana, Trump's campaign press secretary, Hogan Gidley. He had said to MSNBC that polls were heavily skewed. And that the Democrats, he can't really blame the Democrats for not being enthusiastic for Joe Biden. He went on to say that, when pushed on it, he went on to say that when you look at all the polls, they show similar numbers. All the polls have also flawed. They're also flawed methodology. They have a flawed methodology. He was critiquing the way in which these polls were being conducted. He said, let's be clear, the poll we talked about from CNN just came out, and I believe this morning had 26% Republican sample in exit polling in 2016. It was 33%. That's a 7% difference. So it's pretty obvious that as we move forward into the election, these polls are going to flow towards the Democratic Party. I remember thinking, the night of 2016, I was wondering, who are these folks polling? Because it seemed as if the polling got it wrong. It seemed as if the trust that folks had in, these thermometers that we use to take the political temperature of the country seems to be off. I'm going to let you each weigh on it, but I want to start off with Nate. Do you think that we should be more cautious and not take these polls at face value, or do do you believe that these polls, because there seems to be a wider margin than there was 4 years ago, is there some kind of trend that these polls are indicating about?
It's a bit of both. We shouldn't let the polls trick us into getting comfortable, but if we use the polls as kind of indicators, we do see that there is a kind of shift from, okay, giving the keys to the guy who, bragged about his lack of experience maybe wasn't the best idea. Maybe we should go back to someone who at least claims to know what they're doing. But, we don't want to get as comfortable as we in a corporate sense did in 2016, where because people in important areas didn't show up to vote, those longstanding Democratic places were able to be won over by Trump, which saw him enter the White House. We don't want the same conditions to happen now, but because we have that indicator, we see, okay, maybe we can actually fight in places where we think we could fight 4 years ago. Maybe we can win statewide elections in Texas. Maybe we can fight in Georgia. Maybe we can fight in Arizona. So it's a balancing act that we have to figure out, but there's a potential that there's not just potential, there's fertile ground ready for harvesting. We just
Thank
have
you,
to go
Mr.
about it the
McCall.
right
I'm interested
way.
in getting your take because you are someone that is relying on these polls heavily, being that you're yourself a candidate for office. And when we're looking at polling, it's not just the presidential election that we're considering. We're also considering down ballot races like yours. Do you think that we shouldn't or do you think we shouldn't place as much faith in the polls this year?
Well, again, like how I always say is this. I think at this point where we're at now, I think it's clear Trump is going to lose the popular vote. That's hands down, hands down. So I don't think, personally, in my personal opinion on it, I don't think the national polls matter at this point. I think, again, we already know he's going to lose the popular vote. He knows he's going to lose the popular vote. I think the only polls that I think we should all be paying attention to are the battleground state polls. I think those polls have a better indication of how the electoral college is going to be decided come November 3rd. I think it's a big news splash to say, hey, Biden is up 12 points, 13 points, and it's good for fundraising. Hey, I know perfectly well you have the momentum on your campaign and things like that. It's great for fundraising. But I think far as getting people comfortable in how the election is going, I don't think national polls is a great indication of how things are to be. I think the battleground polls are what I'm more concerned at, and what I'm more concerned of. And I find it so ironic now that Trump, when he first was running in 2016 against Hillary Clinton, you can watch his rallies, man. I'm part of how he blew up. I will take credit to that. I used to run home from law school and couldn't wait to go just laugh at a Trump rally because he used to say stupid things. I never thought he had the opportunity of winning. But the news kept covering him and kept covering him and kept covering him. He got more momentum and momentum and momentum as he went. And he used to actually go, he had a list of polls he used to read. I'm up 20 points here. I'm up 30 points here. And now all of a sudden that he's losing, now all polls are flawed. So it's kind of ironic how he's definitely flipping the script. But I will also add this too. I remember on November of 2016, that election, I thought Hillary Clinton had it in the bag. I was going off the national polls. And I remember my roommate, he's not, at the time I was in Durham, North Carolina, and Durham is heavily Democratic. So all we saw was Democrat stuff all day. We wasn't really conscious of the more battleground areas. North Carolina was a battleground area, but we kind of knew Durham was going Democratic. But anyway, I remember that morning, last polls I read, Clinton was up like 9 points in national polls. Going to kill him. It's going to kill him. She's going to kill him, right? And then something hit me that morning. I was leaving the house. He was like, "Man, she's up 9 points. Like, is it possible?" I was like, "No, I don't think it's possible." But I said, "But it's something that I'm thinking about, and it's what's called the solid majority." All right, the solid majority. I think people are. I will give Trump credit for being an embarrassment. I will give him credit. And I think sometimes too on these polls, people are embarrassed to say they're going to vote for Trump. So I am very conscious of that also, of that factor too, when you're thinking about polls. There are people who are diehard Trump supporters. They're going to vote for Trump. There are people who voted for Trump in 2016 and going to vote for him again just to say, I ain't no fool. I know who I voted for and I know who I want in the seat, although he's wrecking the country. And then there's people as well who are silent, who's like, yeah, I know, but I'm not going to tell you. I might say I'm an undecided voter, or I'll say I'm voting for Biden. When they get in that polls and they close that curtain, I think, there are some people who want to vote for Trump. So again, all in all, I do think the national polls are kind of irrelevant at this point, as far as self momentum and fundraising. But the state and battleground polls are where I'm more focused at, and I think the country at this time.
Yeah, and as you were speaking, I was thinking about this quote by Pauline Kael. She was an American film critic. And this is back when Nixon won. She said, I can't believe Nixon won. I don't know anyone who voted for him. And there's this kind of feel that there are folks who just won't admit, there are folks who just won't admit that they're voting for President Trump. And that's what happened in 2016. And the surprise was the majority, the amount of people who did that. Now, these folks, as you had mentioned, were not the majority because we know that Clinton won the popular vote. And I did make this argument to some other folks before it. You never had a situation where, even when you want to go back to George W. Bush in 2000, in 2004, he ended up winning the popular vote. You never had somebody who gets in based on electoral college numbers, loses the popular vote, and then the same thing happening again in the next re-election campaign. That's never happened. Chris, you look like you're itching to jump in, man. I just want to get your thoughts on this, because you've been heavily involved with the Clinton campaign.
Yeah. So in 2016, as you all are recounting those days, I remember I was in Ohio working as a field organizer in Cleveland, knocking on doors, registering voters, and obviously checking the polls nightly, checking 538, real clear politics, the Cook Political Report, just to see what's going on. And over time, you had to learn that polls are not law, right? They are not going to be determinant of the outcome. I think one ways in which they can be helpful is, like Mr. McCall said, is it can help with fundraising and kind of give you a temperature check around momentum. I think it also can help campaigns determine how they'll allocate resources and funds to different states. But I think that for us, our marching orders have to be based on who we want to see in the office going forward. If you're an average voter, if you're watching on this broadcast, you shouldn't be checking the polls to determine if you are going to register to vote, or if you're going to register to receive a vote by mail application. You've got to make sure that you do what you can so that you can have a better future and a better administration going forward. I also will say that we also have to understand that the polls that we are receiving today are indicators of how people felt 10 days ago. That's what most strategists will say. So basically, it takes a while for this data to be populated and for it to be shared. And basically, what they'll say is, okay, so today, John Lewis passed away, Herman Cain passed away, Trump put out a tweet about, wanting to postpone the election. There are a set of circumstances that have, kind of cluttered the political brain at this moment. And you may have a pollster ask you today, how do you feel about the candidates? How do you feel about Joe Biden? How do you feel about Donald Trump? How do you feel about these particular issues? They'll ask you that today. And in 2 weeks, you'll see the polling data be shared publicly. And in 2 weeks, there could be a whole new story that'll come out and will dominate that moment. So I think that we also have to understand that what polling does is an indicator of information that's gathered from 2 weeks ago. And we have to continue looking forward and understanding that our marching orders are based on, the values that we carry, the future and the vision for the future that we want. But polling should not determine our action.
And, as you were talking, I was just thinking about, the fact that, campaigns that get a little bit too comfortable with polls seem to do so to their detriment. I remember, the 1948 election, Tom Dewey versus Harry Truman, and Truman famously holds up the newspaper that says, Dewey defeats Truman. And that back then wasn't a political upset. Nobody expected Truman to win. When he became president, It was by an accident. Franklin Roosevelt had died in 1945, April. Harry Truman gets in there, and people start saying, "What was the nation? Who is this person from? Who's this country?" Harvard Asher from Missouri, and he ends up doing a lot of consequential things, such as the deployment of the atomic bomb, his stance on labor unions. He was actually very much in line with, for the time being, the civil rights movement. Amethyst, I'm interested in your thoughts in terms of the faith that we trust in polls. Polls seem to be at a sweet spot right now for former Vice President Biden. Do you think that this is a trend that will be likely to continue, or do you think polls fluctuate, they go back and forth, they're not reliable, like Chris said, it's just a temperature as to how things were a few days ago as opposed to right now? We can never really be too confident in these polls.
I officially think that we cannot be confident in polls and that they're just little indicators, because just shockingly that Donald Trump even won, because I remember walking past my TV screen and seeing a blue California and then all these red states that have never been red before. And I'm like, hold the phone. So I think that, polls, while they can be indicators of how we feel in the moment, or 2 weeks ago, like Chris just told us, because I didn't even know that was a thing. At this point, there are so many people that believe in Donald Trump. Believe in his message, whether that be make America great again, whether that mean law and order. I can't say that a poll is going to tell me that man is not going to win, although we're all hoping that he doesn't. But the way that people feel about him is ridiculous with all that he does. So I think polls are good indicators, but that's not going to tell me who's going to win.
So I want to transition to Senate. Speaking of polls, I'm looking at some polls myself, and I want to transition to Senate polls. A lot of times we don't really as much attention as we should on the Senate race, but this time the Senate race is interesting in that you have some really solid candidates running for office on the Democratic side. Mark Kelly, former astronaut, running in Arizona, running against Martha McSally, who seems to be a little bit underwater in polling, because remember, Martha McSally ran against the senator who had been elected as the Democratic senator, Christian Nielsen, I believe her name is. Well, she was now appointed by the governor of Arizona to replace John McCain after his passing. And so the two candidates who ended up running against each other end up now both serving in the Senate. And so it kind of explained the quick, come around. She had the video with the dog, and she was saying, "Oh, let's get behind our new senator." She knew that in the back of her mind, she had a Senate position coming her way. But that aside, that you have that in Arizona, you've got my home state. It seemed like 538 has Tom Tillis and Cal Cunningham at a dead heat, 43% to 43%. You have Kelly and McSally, like I mentioned, 53% for Kelly, 35% for McSally. If that's not underwater, I don't know what is. You've got Gary Peters in Michigan, 52%. John James, African-American Republican, 35%. These are huge. In polling numbers, these are huge, huge margins. And it just seems like there's a trend here. Usually you would have more of a close margin. But in this, it just seems like there's as Chiquez had mentioned a referendum on the current administration. So I want to throw this out there. Being that, and especially, Doug Jones in Alabama, when did we think we'll see a Democratic senator coming out of Alabama? And with my personal experiences with the Democratic Party in Alabama, Madison County, I know they weren't expecting it either in 2017, but they had in Roy Moore such a controversy-filled candidacy, allegation after allegation, and not just allegation, but really weird allegations coming out the woodwork. But now they go ahead and they nominate Tommy Tuberville. So, former football coach, I believe, and he seems much more of a solid choice than Roy Moore, and the Trump's former attorney general, the one that Trump now distanced himself from. Do you all think that the Senate seems to be going in a direction for a blue wave, or do you think that polls don't matter at the end of the day? Red states that are traditionally red states are going to stay red when you're looking at North Carolina, Alabama. Do you think that this is something that we should be more optimistic about or not. Ariana?
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, no, I think that we should be optimistic that there's going to be a blue wave. I was actually doing some research earlier today, looking at a few states that will be possibly toss-up states. Some states that are, I know for sure Georgia. Well, that's one state that I've been looking at with Senator Perdue. And now John Ossoff is running against him, and I think that we're very optimistic that Ossoff will win. And so with that, that's and we were super excited to see that how Georgia, that is currently a red state, is kind of turning towards a purple state. And I think that that's what's going to happen for a lot of these other states. I think we definitely should be looking at Colorado, which is a Republican, which has a Republican senator. Montana, Iowa, of course, Georgia, North Carolina, and Maine, because those are possibly states that will either become a purple state or will go blue.
Thank you. And as you mentioned earlier, especially when it pertains to Georgia, and I'm actually in the process of transitioning and moving to Georgia myself. The one thing I'm worried about is the voter turnout suppression, the voter turnout suppression efforts. In 2018, there was a reason why Stacey Abrams did not become governor. And we know that even the whole process with having a candidate who was eligible to run as a candidate and still serve as the Secretary of State for the office and manage the electoral system. I mean, just on its face, even if you take D and R out of their names and just look at it just at face value, that just did not look right. It didn't look legit. But Nate, I'm interested in getting your insight, because you and I both went to Oakland University, as did Chris, and we did have some kind of interactions with the local Democratic Party. So Doug Jones is someone who he's made appearances in Huntsville. Huntsville is a very progressive city in Alabama, northern Alabama. Do you think that Senate races like Doug Jones that's a done deal for the Republicans? Or do you think that we have more of a fighting chance than we think?
In a year like this, there's no such thing as a done deal. And that's one thing I've learned. There's no such thing as a done deal when we're talking about elections. Doug Jones was able to win in his special election because he ran up the score in Alabama, he ran up the score in Birmingham and Montgomery, and he ran up the score in smaller cities like Selma. We shouldn't just write off Doug Jones just because he's running in a state like Alabama. The Alabama Democratic Party and local organizers have already signaled that they're willing to fight. The Senate really does look like it's going to go red. And as someone who I grew up in the Northeast, there a lot of safe seats for Democrats, with the exception of Susan Collins in Maine. But so I don't really have any Senate elections by me, but watching all these other races, maybe I'm not as optimistic about, say, McGrath in Kentucky. But, when you look at races like the Senate race in Montana, which is a traditionally red state, but already has a Democratic senator. The outgoing governor is a Democrat, and he's a very popular one who handled the pandemic very well. In polls, it's looking like he's got a better chance in this race than we think. We have better candidates this time around, and it goes back to what I said earlier about 2016 being a perfect storm. We picked up 2 Senate seats in 2016. 2018 wasn't really a great year as far as seats go. We were defending seats in states like North Dakota, but we have a really big opportunity this year to win back some seats. We have the opportunity to pick up Arizona, where Mark Kelly, the astronaut, the former congresswoman's husband, is looking really good. Even Texas is more competitive than we thought it was going to be a year ago. People are willing to fight, and that's really a big deal.
And as you were speaking, I was thinking about, the conversation we had last week on this same platform, where the panelists I had at the time, we were talking about what's exciting in one location may not be what's exciting in another location. So, for instance, the upset that happened in the congressional race that just took place in New York, where the more progressive candidate beat the incumbent who has been in office for years. We know AOC, her story, and the fact that she was able to beat an incumbent Democrat who was, a staple in the House of Representatives. So, Cassandra, I'm interested in knowing, are there any Senate races that you're particularly looking at that you think that the Dems have more of a chance than the Republicans, or do you think that consistently across the board, it just looks like a referendum, so folks are going to voter turnout will be high, it seems, and the polls indicate that it's going to be a huge gap? Do you think that there are certain states that we may pick up, but overall the Republicans will hold the majority, or do you think the Democrats seem to be on a track to win back the majority of the Senate?
Well, I know what I'd like, and what I'd like is for the Senate to switch back to a Democratic majority, because as we've seen, the Senate has been a roadblock at literally every turn in the past 4 years, 3.5 years. I've been paying a lot of attention to the one that you mentioned, Kentucky and McGrath, because McConnell has consistently been very disappointing. He's been the subject of a lot of ire from, I think, everyone involved, including some Republicans. So, and I think that he and the rest of Republicans recognize that, because they recently very clearly are starting to show that there are cracks between them and Trump. I think they're trying to distance themselves in order to somehow save themselves, save face, be able to have some kind of plausible deniability when the time comes for people to, reconcile the actions that they've taken in the last 3.5 years and say, how does this actually represent us? How did you help us? And the bare bones and true answer is they haven't. So the only way for them to really hold on to, any kind of power is to distance themselves from what I think is inevitably going to be what they scapegoat, and I think that's going to be Trump. Now, I don't necessarily think that that's a winning tactic. I think it seems like a very defensive tactic, and it seems as if they themselves recognize the danger. So to me, that's a hopeful indication. That being said, Senate seats are so much more institutional than House seats. House seats can be flipped a lot more frequently, and they represent smaller districts, so the community that they're actually engaged with is so much smaller. And I think for Senate, since there's only 2 of them per state, people, for better or for worse, are not as well versed in Senate races, even if they are the more prominent ones that people know about more from, television, media, etc. I guess the short answer is I think we are definitely going to see at least a few turnover seats. I think that McConnell's in a really, really bad position. And I think that the fact that Beto O'Rourke was so close to overturning Ted Cruz's seat last time was already a positive indicator, because he's a Democrat in Texas. So I think that the Republicans have reason to be running a little bit scared and be a little defensive, because that's how I see it.
Yeah, and another thing that makes this election cycle interesting, the next factor is the Lincoln Project factor. I mean, if you've seen these ads, these Lincoln Project ads have hit it right on the nose. They have a target, and they have not missed the mark. It seems like Republicans know how to hit. It seems better to me, in my personal opinion. They know how to hit and be counterpunchers more than Democrats. And to have a Republican group have an ad, and they saying know their names, and they show you the image, and they have the name in large print for you to see. I think that it has a psychological factor too, because when a lot of folks may not know some of the names, but if you put these names in front of them in print, in bold, and then they go in a voting booth and they recognize the name, and then they recognize a negative connotation to that name, I just think that's going to have an effect on it. And to have not just the Lincoln Project, but you've got George W. Bush alumni, you've got so many different Republican groups who are coming together, funding these ads, running them in places that are very accessible for people to see. It's not like a secret, only cable news station or anything like that. You're seeing them on YouTube. You're seeing these things on social media, places that people would normally go to. You're seeing these Lincoln Project ads. Shaquez, I'm interested because I know you're on the ground in South Carolina. There's a big race. Jamie Harrison, who was a former staffer for Congressman Clyburn, running against Lindsey Graham, who has made himself an embedded part of the Washington, D.C. Republican culture. Do you see, at the end of the day, it's South Carolina, and I know that Colbert actually made a joke early in the primary, and had mentioned that something was like non-existent, like the South Carolina Democratic Party, and I'm wondering if Jamie Harrison actually has a chance against Lindsey Graham.
I think listen. I was about to say, y'all was going around the panel here. No one said Jamie Harris. I said, well, man, maybe I was a little too optimistic. Listen, I'm gonna tell y'all. Y'all know, everybody on this panel definitely knows, money take you a long way in elections. Jamie Harrison just raised over $14 million last quarter. That's like tremendous. And I think what he's doing is definitely it's a referendum on Donald Trump as well as a referendum on Lindsey Graham, who is the biggest flip-flopper. I mean, definitely, I think one of the biggest flip-floppers in the Senate at this moment. He was a staunch Trump, never Trumper. And then once he realized, oh, snap, I got an election in a couple of years in South Carolina. I think Trump won South Carolina by like 22 points or so. I think he looked at the numbers and said, if I don't want to have a strong primary, I need to start being a Trump lover. And now he's a Trump lover. And it's funny how Jamie Harrison plays his ass. Half of it is never Trump. Half of it is supporting Trump. It's just a whole mess. And I honestly believe, listening to people on the grounds, that he has a legitimate chance, man. Most times I tell people all the time, I will say, I don't think it's going to happen. But I honestly believe, man, especially from a person like Jamie Harrison, who was told his whole life he couldn't do things. I think he's definitely using this as a motivating tool to run hard and run scared, man. Again, it's South Carolina, so I understand the enormity of the task that's ahead of us, but the man's raising money, man. And I know in politics, I know in campaigns, when it's time you're sitting down in that war room, you're looking at where the money at, what you have to do, how many more voters you have to reach. You're looking for the money. He has it, and that's something that's going to go a long way. And that's the reason why I think as a Real Clear Politics move his seat from safe Republican to likely R. And this is South Carolina, folks. This isn't Florida. This isn't North Carolina or other or Virginia, others, southern states that has went a little purple. South Carolina is red. But I think what you're saying is, again, it's a referendum election. Although it typically happens in the midterm year, I think this is definitely a referendum still. People finally got the opportunity. I feel like I think a lot of us felt as if we left a lot on the table in 2016, and that's how Trump became president. I think people are like, okay, at the end of the day, we have to come out again and vote in 2020. And I believe that Republican candidates suffer from it tremendously, and I think Lindsey Graham may be a victim of that suffering. So yeah, Jamie Harrison all the way.
Thank you. And as you were talking, I was just thinking about the Lincoln Project ad that had Lindsey Graham, on the campaign trail. He used, an expletive to describe the current president while he was running against him. And then all of a sudden, he switches, and you see him in morning talk shows making a complete 180. And then you have the ad with Joe Biden where he's saying, almost in tears, the man. I mean, if you don't see sincerity in this man's face, I don't know he looks like he was on the verge of crying and explaining why Joe Biden was such a decent human being, and why if you have a problem with Joe Biden, something is seriously wrong with you. I mean, to have that as a picture, and I don't know how many times these ads have been running in South Carolina. I'm very curious to know, like, if I was living in South Carolina, how many times am I seeing these ads on regular TV? But the impact that these ads have, I think it's going to be very interesting. But I wanted to transition to the Senate relief bill, the new Senate relief bill. It seems as if Congress is not going to come to an agreement. We know that there have been more rollbacks on the Republicans' proposal. They want to, instead of having $600 a week for unemployment benefits, want to scale back to $200 a week. And there've been more, less generous proposals that have been, floated around by GOP senators. Mitch McConnell, they want to call it the HEALS Act, and it stands for the Health Economic Assistance Liability Protection in Schools Act. They're drafting, different proposals, but on the flip side, you've got House Democrats saying, we're not going to support that because, nobody can live off $200 a week. And I want to get your guys' thoughts on whether or not you think that the politics surrounding this bill, keep in mind this is coronavirus relief bill. Do you think that this would come into effect for voters, swing state voters, middle of the road voters? Do you think that they will look at this and say, I'm looking at the party that seems to be more, generous towards me in terms of this very difficult time I'm dealing with. I may be at home working from on the computer. I may be unemployed. I may be laid off. Ariana, do you think that this is something that will come to hurt the Republicans? It seems as if there's a huge difference between the first stimulus package that came out a few months ago and the one that's about to be released now.
Most definitely. Well, for one, I guess for me, when I saw that they were cutting it from 600 to 200, I actually think I saw a article where they were saying that pretty much the Republicans, or I think it was 2 Republican senators, I can't remember, how they were saying that the reason why they're cutting is because people were taking advantage of the of unemployment. And of course, there are people that are going to abuse the system. However, what about the people that aren't abusing the system that actually need this money, that, that they're living off of this because they've lost their jobs due to COVID-19. Also, I still don't understand why they're only giving us a one-time $1,200 check. I'm not understanding, as looking at other countries where, especially Canada, where they're providing and also healthcare and education, but looking at Canada and seeing how they're providing their citizens with monthly checks, and seeing how they think that people can live off $1,200 when there's when actually they said this was a new phase of COVID-19. We don't know what it's going to look like. How are we going to survive? And then I'm thinking, like, with that new phase, how are people going to survive off of $200 of unemployment? So I think that depending on what this act will look like, it will change people's perspective of the Republican Party, and that may, in a sense, help the Democratic Party, because they've noticed now that when the Democratic Party, they will fight for you, they'll fight for your needs, whereas the Republicans, they think that we're just taking this money and just kind of pocketing it.
Cassandra, what's your response to, Mitch McConnell took to the Senate floor and he said, the American people do not support, putting up large sums of money for folks who are
well, you're frozen right now, so I don't know what the whole quote was. But I'm assuming that you're talking about the response to Mitch McConnell's basically assertion that people are taking advantage of the system, and that basically cutting it back will encourage people to go back to work. The single thing I would just point to is the military budget that they're trying to slip in there. Like the extra $8 billion or something, is something like that. It's a very clear allocation of where their priorities are. And it's not with protecting people who are losing their jobs and losing their health care and losing child care and like basically having their entire lives disrupted. So I think we've lost him.
Yeah, thank you. Someone want to take it over?
I definitely say that slipping taking down unemployment coverage from 600 to 200 is definitely a bad choice, especially when you consider that a few months ago when the original stimulus passed, what we saw this Congress do was give everybody $1,200 and say good luck for covering rent, deciding whether you want to pay groceries or to pay for your COVID treatment. Have fun with your $1,200. We'll see you later. So it's good that they're going to provide another round of checks. And this time, I think the Senate bill and House bills both call for including people who are dependents in 2018. So college students who are still considered dependents. That's good, but we can't just cut down unemployment coverage, especially because a lot of people don't have jobs to go back to. So the Democrats definitely have an advantage because they've already passed a bill that, to me at least, is much better in my completely unbiased opinion as a registered Democrat. But I don't think cutting benefits has ever been a good idea.
We've seen the sense of urgency in the House that we do not see in the Senate. The Senate side and McConnell's very specific quotes are all about, oh, we'll get to it, like it might come out next week, maybe a week after. And people living right now are living very, very day to day, very stressed. They need assistance now. And so the fact that the Senate Majority Leader is so laissez-faire about this shows a really stark disconnect between him and the people that he's supposed to serve. And I think that people will see that. I think that they'll recognize that, they're not very pressed about what people's lives need. They're more concerned about the appearance of just giving handouts, which in its own way is, in my opinion, sort of morally bankrupt because, if people need help, and they're asking for help, it's sort of a government's role to provide that. Acting as if punishing people by lowering these unemployment checks is somehow going to galvanize people is just faulty. If you had, if there were jobs to go to, and if this was not a pandemic, maybe. I'm not even going to say it's correct, but maybe. But right now is not the time to try and make a stance about, work ethic. I think it's a very strange traditional thing to hold on to at this moment.
Yeah, I think the work ethic conversation coupled with we being the party of fiscal responsibility and making sure that we can no longer incur more debts for our country is just really funny to me because this is the same party that passed the steepest tax cut in 2017 that gave so many tax breaks to the wealthiest corporations and businesses across this country. And then also when we think about some of the SBA loans and grants that were supposed to go out to small businesses, we saw big companies like the Lakers and Shake Shack and other places getting handouts. And so if we're going to have a conversation about fiscal responsibility, let's have an honest one, but let's also make sure that it focuses on supporting those who have struggled the most. And as Michael explained in my introduction, I work for a district office for a state representative here in Southwest Philadelphia. And we get calls from constituents every single day. Folks who are dealing with unemployment, have been unemployed since the beginning of the pandemic and are struggling to pay rent. Rent is due tomorrow. Bills are due in a couple of weeks, and people are struggling now. And so for Congress and our leaders in Washington to try to play politics and do some offhand lecturing, people just don't want to hear that right now. And we've got to do all that we can, give all that we can to support those families in need and real small businesses, local businesses in need. So, yeah.
Thank you all. And I want to use this time, being that time, it seems to be slipping away. And I'm sorry about my internet connection, but I'm back. And I want to talk about, being that, we're so close or at the cusp of former Vice President Biden announcing his running mate. We're almost at the convention season. I wanted to get your take as to who you all would think would be the best VP for former Vice President Biden. Why would they, be the best choice, electorally, practically, politically. And I've already made my opinion known in the first broadcast that we've had that my view is that Elizabeth Warren, to me, is Elizabeth, just before, let me explain myself. Elizabeth Warren to me would be my choice. During the primary season, she seemed to be an excellent campaigner in terms of fundraising numbers. She seems to also be the closest thing to Bernie Sanders under consideration. And I'm worried about the apathetic Bernie voter who didn't, get their way 2 election cycles in a row. Very hesitant and uninspired by the Biden candidacy. And typically, historically, JFK chose Lyndon Johnson so that he could solidify the Democratic Party in 1960. Back in those days, Texas was in play for Democrats, and Lyndon Johnson did deliver Texas. So he offered a political advantage in being able to talk to Southern Democrats and also win a huge electoral state like Texas. Reagan chose H.W. Bush. It wasn't for a geographical reason, I believe, but it was more so for a political reason. Bush was more of a country club Republican. Reagan was more of an ideologue. He wanted to be the FDR of the right. He is very staunch right wing at the time. I knew, even Professor Foster, who was actually on the broadcast too, had mentioned that during that time, he didn't think that Reagan would be elected because the idea was that he was too extreme. He was too far right. And I believe the Jimmy Carter campaign, actually celebrated a little bit when Reagan became the nominee in 1980. But, historically, there seems to be a pairing of two, political people who seem to complement each other in some way, somehow. I made the case against Kamala Harris, and I know I may get a lot of pushback because I had said that even Mickey Mouse could give us California because it's going blue no matter what. But being that she dropped out not for any other reason other than the fact that she was doing poorly in terms of fundraising. Biden is also struggling with fundraising. Elizabeth Warren a few months, I think a month ago or a few weeks back, had a fundraising teleconference, raised $7 million for Biden. I'm curious to know if you disagree. I'm sure you do. Why you disagree, and who would be your choice? I'm going to go ahead and start with Ariana.
Can I actually go last?
Sure. Chiquez, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Definitely, I'll hop in first. Hey, before we swing to that real fast, I want to say about these unemployment checks. I think the biggest person who's winning this conversation here is Andrew Yang. I think if he was able to come back and say that that basic income plan, I think a lot of people will be more receptive of this time. So if he runs again in 2024 or 2028, I definitely think he'll have a lot of momentum on his campaign because people actually saw how direct income to them affected their finances. So I think he'll have a lot of sway come the next election. But again, back to the VP race, I think I'm one of the biggest Elizabeth Warren fans. Oh man, I love Elizabeth Warren. I love her. I love her to death. I love her to death. I kind of campaigned for her down here in South Carolina, but it's tough getting people of color to vote, kind of be more in that to vote for her because she's a progressive and most progressive, to be honest with you, most white progressives struggle with the black vote, primarily in the South, where it's conservative. But looking at it, I would love to say Elizabeth Warren, right? Because it kind of helps mold both sides. But you got to think about it. I think we're going to have Joe Biden, who's going to have loose lip. He says something, it could be. I'm not putting anything past Joe Biden. He could say things that hurt. So they're looking for the Donald Trump team is looking for anything now to attack. They're throwing all this stuff at Joe Biden, and it's not working. It's not working. It's not working. So his VP pick must be safe. Elizabeth Warren is not safe. They're going to attack her about the heritage stuff, about the Native American heritage stuff. It's not going to be good. You're going to have a lot of people of color very ticked off about it. And again, and also too, the Bernie Sanders people, Bernie Sanders voters. I'm a Elizabeth Warren supporter, and I know for a fact, true diehard Bernie Sanders supporters are very pessimistic about Elizabeth Warren. They thought she was kind of trying to catered to the middle towards the end of when she was rising in the polls. She was trying to undercut um, Bernie Sanders, and then the whole thing about he mentioning that he thought that there couldn't be a female president. So a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters are not that receptive of him. So I think with that, I just think she's kind of out of the picture. And I think if we're serious about winning elections, if we're serious about winning, I think me personally, I love Elizabeth Warren, but I think we have to go to we have to get a candidate who can help us win the Midwest. And I think the governor of Michigan, Gresham Whitmer, if I'm saying it correctly, she's a woman who helps us out. I think she caters to that suburban, that white suburban woman, which is something we need. I think it's definitely changing more towards the Democratic Party, but I think it's very, very helpful. And she's from the Midwest, and I think the Midwestern region, which is definitely almost the toss-up state, is something we should focus on. I definitely think she's the perfect candidate for it. Kamala Harris, I love her to death as well. I just think, what does she bring? I mean, she's probably going to be one of the next presidents. I won't put it past her. It's just more sort of line. California is already a given. She's a moderate fundraiser, and then thirdly, I forgot my third point. But thirdly, again, I love Kamala. I just don't think she would. Oh, sorry, I know the third point. I'm sorry, I'm running over. Biden has, I hate to say it, but Biden has that kind of a strong black support because of Barack Obama. He has that. So what does she bring? She brings that support, the black vote with her. But I think Biden already has that. So now he should be trying to broaden his base. I think he broadened his base with a candidate like Gresham Whitmer, she's not a really polarizing figure, but I think she would definitely be a great place, a great shoe-in for that. Sorry for rambling.
Yeah, and no. And as you were talking, you brought my memory back to the primary process, and I remember when Elizabeth Warren came out, and I was surprised at the way she attacked Bernie Sanders. There was this pressure, remember, to distance herself or have some kind of differentiation between her and Bernie Sanders, because it seemed as if up until that point they were always in lockstep with each other on the issues. And so the issue became, okay, we're getting serious. Iowa caucuses are coming around the corner. How do we actually differentiate from each other so that when people go to these caucuses, they have a reason as to why they're going to either one of the campaigns. Professor Foster was on the program 2 weeks ago, and he had mentioned, he would rather win the Senate than to win the presidency. And what he meant was that if Elizabeth Warren, goes ahead and runs and successfully, they go on together to win the nomination and the presidency, the concern is that there's a Republican governor in Massachusetts and that he will replace Elizabeth Warren with another Republican. And so the balance of the Senate will be tipped back more in favor for the Republican side. Now that was both, valid points. But I'm interested, Amethyst, in your view, who is the best pick for Biden? Why? Would they improve his chances, and how so?
So I love Stacey Abrams. And I mean, like, in an ideal world, if Amethyst was just pick somebody that would happen, I truly do love Stacey Abrams. I think she's very strong, very passionate, and she came up into this political world with a lot of fight, and a lot of people were against her, and she still made it happen and made it work and stuck to her values without swaying. So I really love Stacey Abrams. However, I do understand that there's political likeness to consider. There's someone who's going to help Joe Biden govern day one on the ground running, even though, as we know, experience didn't matter in this election at all, the last election. But the person that's coming in is literally going to be the cleanup crew. And I think we would also have to consider someone who would lead the Democratic Party if Joe Biden only ran on one term. Or something, God forbid, happened. So may not be popular, but I think that Susan Rice also brings something to the table as far as foreign policy is concerned. You got to worry about the whole Benghazi stuff as far as like people like coming at her in a lot of like, what am I trying to say? Like a lot of ads and a lot of, backlash and all that kind of stuff. I feel like you have to worry about that with Susan Rice. But I think that she knows what she's doing coming in and that she has a lot of experience. And like I said before, experience apparently didn't matter last election, but I think she would be a good person to come in on the ground running, knowing what's going on and being able to do something. However, if it was Amethyst's choice, Stacey Abrams, all the way.
Chris? Oh, you're muted. Sorry about that.
Sorry about that. So I know that Vice President Biden is planning to make his announcement within the first week of August. And so we should all get ready for all the speculation and, all the stories that are going to run within the next few weeks, the leaked quotes to be made here from Biden's inner circle, or people who think they are in his inner circle. But I think that there are a few sort of certain circumstances that we have to consider as we think about who he may pick and why. And I think the first most important kind of measure for a vice president is, are they ready and prepared or qualified to be president of the United States? Vice president is one heartbeat away from that seat. And so someone who is going to be Biden's running mate has to be qualified to be president of the United States, no matter what. And I think that some of the names who have risen to the top meet that first qualification. Senator Kamala Harris, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Susan Rice, who has the strongest foreign policy experience of anyone in the field. We've heard rumblings about Congresswoman Karen Bass, who was a former Speaker of the House of the State of California, who has a tremendous resume as well. And so I think all of those, each of these individuals are great candidates, have great potential to be a strong vice president and potential president of the United States, as well as armor bearer for the Democratic Party going forward. But I think that we also need someone who is going to be able to be a strong messenger as well as a strong fundraiser for Vice President Biden. And I think that on those two qualifications, Elizabeth Warren is a really strong candidate. She has been, in terms of political figures, she ranks second in terms of raising money for Joe Biden next to Barack Obama. So you're looking at two people who have raised the most money for Joe Biden, specifically for him. It's been Barack Obama and then Elizabeth Warren. She's a great fundraiser. And then also just looking at her message discipline and her ability to really tell stories to people and connect with people can really make her another strong voice on the trail for Vice President Biden. So I am a strong fan of Senator Warren, but I also think that Kamala Harris brings good qualifications to the ticket. I think that it'll be tremendous to see for the first time a Black woman on a presidential ticket. It will make history. I think that we should be, as African-American people in America, should be encouraged to see that and be willing to support her if she becomes a nominee. But it's also clear that if you are looking for a vice president to determine who you're going to vote for in November, after all we've seen in these last few weeks, we're going to have some problems. And so I understand that we put a lot into account for the vice president pick, but it shouldn't be who we determine in November. It should just kind of give a better picture of how they're going to govern in January.
Right. And I like your analysis as to, first of all, I didn't know that so many people would agree with me, but I like your analysis too as to why Elizabeth Warren, would be a strong candidate outside of fundraising, her ability to stay on message. She was one of the most disciplined campaigns out there. With Bernie Sanders, you had Bernie Sanders.
I want to say one thing.
Go ahead.
I think the reason why Elizabeth Warren is, she came, I think her biggest supporters were the educated, like people who had advanced degrees. So I think most of the people here are in law school or things like that. I think if you look at it, the educated class are the people who resonate well with her because of the policies. We actually saw a person who actually did their homework. And to me, that gets me every time, man. I love people to see. I like to see people do their homework, and she's the perfect candidate for that, man. So I think we're not a good sample to say why we're Warren supporters or not. I think it's already out there that people with our education status are going to be Elizabeth Warren.
And thank you for bringing that out because there is a socioeconomic factor that we have to consider too as to what would appeal to the electorate. Ariana, your thoughts on your preferred VP choice for Biden, and I want to throw this twist in there because I threw it in there when we talked about it 2 weeks ago, and that is there. I remember 2008 in the summer when then Senator Barack Obama was running against Senator Hillary Clinton. That there was this, and then he ended up defeating her in the primary. There was this scene, a footage of a woman, a lot of angry white, suburban white Democratic women who had claimed that the Democratic Party had thrown them aside. And so I was curious as to your thoughts on whether do you think, that could, or putting a black woman in the VP slot this time around, and potentially having the first female vice president being an African American woman vice president before you have a white woman serving in that capacity. Do you think that would serve as somewhat of a backlash in the fall campaign?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I do think it could serve as a backlash. However, I think right now, personally, my choice would have been Stacey Abrams as well. I think just right now, she would do a good job as a vice president. I think that her ability to, if you see what happened in Georgia, the fact that, she was, very, very close to receiving the governor's seat, but due to, voter suppression tactics, she wasn't able to. But I think that she would be able to help campaign and get those people that normally wouldn't vote to actually go out and vote. However, I do think there's that her and Biden would clash, with a lot of their policy issues. Personally, I used to think that Keisha Lance Bottoms would have been a good second runner-up as a black woman candidate. However, I think with what's going on in Atlanta right now, a lot of the issues, especially dealing with COVID, and also how the governor of Georgia right now is suing her due to her mask mandate. I think that would kind of put her more so into the negative category, and no one really looking at her as a candidate due to what's going on. I am personally a fan of Elizabeth Warren as well. I think that her policy issues, I think that she's actually, I think she appeals more to the young voters as well as the older voters. I know when she talked about reducing student loan interest, everyone was excited. When she talked about reparations, everyone was excited. So I think that she would be a great candidate. I think that she's able to appeal to everyone, but also I think that Biden will throw a curveball. We never know. I think that we think that we have this set list of people that could possibly be vice presidential candidates, and I think that he may throw in someone that we've seen, but we've never really paid attention to. So I think that it would be a surprise, to be honest.
Yeah, Nate. You're on mute.
All right, thank you. Well, starting out, I was a huge Elizabeth Warren supporter in the primaries. I donated to her campaign. I have Warren stickers. Fortunately, I don't really have a place to put them, but I do have them. But that being said, I don't know that I necessarily want Warren as vice president. There is the Senate seat to take into account. Although Massachusetts doesn't have a really deep Republican bench, there still is a Republican governor. There's a Republican lieutenant governor. There are people you could put in that seat for at least 2 years to halt any sort of forward progress. And I do believe that her talents are better served as Secretary of the Treasury, where she gets to oversee financial regulation, or as Secretary of Commerce. Stacey Abrams, I love Stacey Abrams. A lot of the reason we're talking about her now is because of a speech she gave a year ago. So it says a lot about her ability to seize the moment, her ability to fundraise, her ability to inspire. But I also know that she really wants to be governor of Georgia. And there has definitely been a racial slant against Abrams' candidacy for vice president, as far as her openly saying that she wants to be considered. As minority leader in Georgia, she represented more people in that office than Pete Buttigieg did as mayor of South Bend, but only one of them was considered to be a serious contender for the White House. So there's a definite racial slant there. But I do understand that she's always stated her dream is to be governor of Georgia. So if she chooses to do so, then that's her prerogative. Although I do think that there is a future for her in national politics. Kamala Harris, California is a safe seat. It's a safe Senate seat. You don't really lose much by adding to the ticket, but California is safely blue. And I do think Kamala's, if we want to give this, if Joe Biden wants to project this broad coalition and that he's going to be this caretaker, it's a lot better for him to choose the best people for the best jobs instead of trying to appoint an heir to see who's going to run the party in 2024 and on. So it might be better to have her as, say, attorney general, where her talents would be better served. Keisha Lance Bottoms, I'm really not as high on her as other people are. She barely won her mayoral race in Atlanta, which is one of the bluest, blackest cities in the country, as a Black woman. So that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence in me for her ability to deliver Georgia in the presidential election, or her ability on Georgia's 2 Senate races and in hotly contested House races. Val Demings is someone who's gotten a lot of buzz. I do see the appeal in her, but outside of impeachment, she doesn't really have much of a national brand, although she is from a swing state. But I'm not as high on her as my parents actually are huge Val Demings fans. And I understand the appeal. It's just not for me. Karen Bass is someone who recent gossip has said is a big front runner. Actually would be satisfied with her, even though she might not be as big of a name. It does give the impression that of a caretaker. Karen Bass is someone who is a big progressive, and I am a fan of the work she does in Congress. Although, in my opinion, if Joe Biden is going to look at Black women from California, he should definitely take a look at Barbara Lee, who has been a big leader in the anti-war movement on Capitol Hill. Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan is very popular. She easily won her statewide race in a swing state. And she would definitely do a lot to boost Michigan, but Michigan is looking very likely to flip back anyway. And she is the daughter of a Blue Cross Blue Shield executive, which is one of the largest health insurance companies in the country. I don't know what that looks like for, healthcare reform, especially as she stated her opposition to popular policies like Medicare for all. But I do know that she is someone who can win races and fundraise. Susan Rice as well is someone who, remember, picking the right people for the right jobs, is better served as Secretary of State. Plus, she has to answer to Benghazi. My ideal pick, of course, honestly, I think there are a lot of good choices. I think Warren is the best. I'm a huge Warren fan, but the right people for the right jobs. I wouldn't be too mad if Kamala won, if Kamala got the nomination, even though she hasn't proven to be a great fundraiser yet, but she's someone that can kind of bring together both sides of the party. Karen Bass to me is someone I'd be very excited for, to be completely honest. I know she's kind of newer. She doesn't have the big name, but she is someone taken seriously enough on Capitol Hill that she almost ran for Speaker of the House. So people take her seriously. She's well respected by everybody in the party. Although California is safe, I think we've got an embarrassment of riches as far as vice president choices go.
Thank you, Nate. And I want to go ahead and end off by asking all of your, thoughts and reflections on the legacy of John Lewis. Today he was eulogized by former President Barack Obama. Also, former Presidents Bush and Clinton also gave, tribute to the former congressman and the work that he did even before he entered into the political arena in fighting for civil rights and fighting for the right to vote. The right to vote was a key, hallmark in his work. And we know with the removal of Section 5 from the Voting Rights Act, the rise of voter ID laws, voter suppression tactics, no longer the need for southern states or states that have a history of discrimination to check in with the Attorney General's office, has opened the floodgate for all of these attacks that we're seeing in Georgia, for instance, in states like my state, North Carolina. What are your thoughts on the life of John Lewis and his legacy? And I want to get each of your thoughts. I want to start out with Aria, meaning that she had more of a relationship with John Lewis. You've known him, it seems, personally. You worked with him on Capitol Hill, and so I just find it fitting that I'll let you go ahead and start off talking about him.
Yeah. Hearing about the passing of Congressman John Lewis, I think that that hit me the hardest. John Lewis was honestly my hero. It still is my hero, even with him passing. I think he left a legacy that is unmatchable. For me, I guess with my personal story, I've always, heard about John Lewis, especially because he's a household name. And having the opportunity to actually intern for him my senior year of high school, he actually was the reason why I went to go into politics. Seeing his, legacy, or hearing about his legacy, seeing him and seeing, how much he really cared for his people, truly inspired me. And I knew then that that's, politics is something that I wanted to go in, and I always wanted to help people. And I knew that politics was definitely a way for me to be able to do that. I also, one thing I guess that hit me the most was being able to, I think everyone had a story about Congressman John Lewis. And it was always positive to see that he had such a big impact on the youth, and not how much he cared about the youth, and wanting to see us do great, wanting to see us carry on the torch. Even within his letter that was released today, and just, seeing that he wants us to continue. He said, when he said that Emmett Till was his George Floyd, and that, I guess, that hit me the most, because what is going on today happened in his time, and for him to see that and to say, I want you to continue the fight. It doesn't just stop with me; it continues. That hit me the hardest. So I think in order for people to carry on his legacy, you got to go out and vote. He worked so hard. He dedicated his life, to civil rights, for us to have some type of. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. Let me move forward. I think it's just time for us to vote. I think we need to get out. I think we need to educate people on voter suppression. I think we need to get people registered to vote. Everyone in our family needs to be registered. People in our communities need to be registered to vote. It shouldn't just, more social media postings to go out. We need to call your senators and tell them to pass the Voting Rights Act. I think also that the big name change from changing it to the John Lewis Voting Rights Act would be amazing. And I think everyone just needs to get into some good trouble. Good trouble, necessary trouble.
Exactly. Good trouble. Chris?
Once again, thank you, Michael, for having this conversation. And it's been fun to discuss politics and life with all of you. And as I think about the life and legacy of John Lewis, all I can say and feel is a sense of gratitude. If you think about it, he was just 20, 23, 24 years old when he saw injustice happening in his life, in the South, in his worldview, and had the courage to stand in the gap, put his body at risk so that we could have just the right to vote, to the right to gain what we call freedom in America, which is a pursuit that we're going to continue to fight for. I'm going to have to continue to fight for years to come. And if I think about myself at the age of 27 and think about just a few years back when I was 23 or 24, would I have done the same to put my body and my life at risk, literally in the South or in other places, so that we can create a brighter future? And I think that, that gratitude is something I'm going to carry with me going forward. I think also we have to understand that we are today sowing seeds for tomorrow. We have to remain hopeful. And that's what John Lewis did. He believed in this country. He believed in our people, but he also carried hope. And he didn't get too cynical. He was critical of the country, but he wasn't cynical. I think criticism allows for you to see issues and kind of make a decision on what you're going to do, what role will you play to be a problem solver. Cynicism can kind of deter people from moving forward. And so let us continue to remain hopeful, continue to remain critical of this country, critical of injustice, and do all we can to get in good trouble. That means registering people to vote. That means continuing to peacefully protest and staying safe in that way, and also just kind of keeping him in mind and keeping our children and grandchildren to come and their future in mind, just like he did for us. So we thank John Lewis for his life, and we thank him for his legacy.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chiquez.
Yeah, same thing that Chris said, man. Just a great amount of respect and gratitude for his service that he given to this country over the years. And it's just, I think at the baseline of it, man, you have the premise that you have to be the change that you want to see. I think that's just the baseline of it. I think they fought him and many other civil rights leaders, man. They fought for us to be where we're at today. They fought for us to be. I said I had a speech a couple weeks ago, and I was like, listen, we say it all the time, but we are literally our ancestors' wildest dreams, and we have to continue to live up to it. And pioneers like John Lewis, man, it inspires me to keep going forward, man, advocating for us to keep trying to change these institutions that he was 20. I'm 27 years old. When he was 24 years old, he always felt that it can be changed, but I don't think he ever grasped the level of change that we're trying to get done today. And so again, just gratitude for him, having gratitude for his passing and understanding that change is slow. It's very slow, but as Martin Luther King Jr. said, the moral history. I'm about to mess this quote up. Y'all got to go with me on this. The moral art it bends towards justice. I think lo and behold, over time and time again, I think history is on John Lewis' side. I think I'm grateful that this country gave him, although the president kind of shunned him, this country gave him a great going away ceremony. And again, blessings to him and his family. And I think, again, it shows too that looking at his life and the work that he has done, it tells to the next generation, you can't just stand on the sidelines. You have to actually get out and do something. That's getting out, bringing two people to the polls. That's you running for office yourself. That's you registering voters. You advocating for issues that he fought for. You can't no longer sit on the sidelines. I think we have to do something. And just looking at how much he sacrificed, to put on the line literally his own flesh. I think that shows us that we have to do something. I'm ready to grab that torch, and I want our generation to be ready to grab that torch. He definitely held his hand out for someone to grab it. I think our generation needs to be off the sidelines and continue to fight, grab that torch, and carry on the fight.
Thank you, Chiquez. Amethyst.
I definitely was watching President Barack Obama give the eulogy today, and I thought, in contemplation, of just like, what am I doing in the fight for our people? I realized that him at the age, just like all of us have said, at the age of 24, 25, and 23, literally put his body on the line. And am I willing and am I ready to put my body on the line for our people? Like, so it was just a really big reflection time for me. And I realized too that the fire that I had in undergrad, the fire that I had in high school for just like the advancement of our people, as soon as I got into law school and started getting really busy, it's like that fire started to dim. And I really understood today that complacency is not an option. Like, I do not have an option not to get up every day and figure out how my purpose is dedicated to the advancement of African American people. Like, that's just not an option. And listening to the life of John Lewis and all those who came before him and all those who stood next to him, and just seeing the pictures of him with Dr. Martin Luther King, I'm just like, who am I to not do what I'm supposed to do to make sure that we're at a better place for my children to have a future? So I dedicate my life to all those who came before me and all the shoulders that I stand on. And I just thank today for the reflection time that I had to remember that and to keep pushing forward.
And last but not least, Nate.
Well, Mike, thanks again for inviting me on your program. Definitely, I'd say the legacy of John Lewis is that of a trailblazer. The legacy of him and other trailblazers like Shirley Chisholm is that multiple Black women can be considered for the highest office in the land, or vetted for vice president, and nobody bats an eye. You know, we're talking about a job where you're literally a heartbeat away from the president, and a lot of the women we discussed as being contenders are Black women, and nobody's really, and people are looking at them for their qualifications and not just because their skin is darker. It's that young people everywhere are more involved in politics. You know, I'm 22 years old. I don't, like John Lewis at 23 years old was willing to be absolutely brutalized. I know for me, if I got injured in that kind of way, you wouldn't see me on the front lines ever again, but he never let that serve as a deterrent. So it's a call to persistency. You know, like Amethyst said, that fire that I discovered in undergrad kind of faded a little bit as life happens, school happens, but we can't let it fade because there's so much that's depending on us.
Thank you, Nate. And I'm going to end off with my own thoughts too. You know, John Lewis, the first time he saw his name printed, I believe he saw it as the boy preacher. That was the headline that featured him, because he had given a sermon at his church. And he was also, I believe, I think he was the only young person that spoke in the March on Washington in 1963. And I would challenge those who have been viewing or will watch this later, who may think, why waste my time between the lesser of two evils this November? Why vote for somebody that I'm not 100% sold on? John Lewis could have thought that way in 1960 with Kennedy and Nixon. John Lewis could have thought that way in the multitude of elections that he's had the opportunity to live through. But instead, he saw the system as it was, flaws and all, and he decided to dedicate his life to it. And to not just dedicate his life to it, but to be so willing to even endure physical abuse. Blood was spilled at the end of Pettus Bridge. Police beat him over the head with a baton to ensure that you have the right to now vote and make your voice heard in this country. And I think, with that in mind, how can you not want to get up and get engaged? As Amethyst mentioned, that working on behalf of African American people, working for people who have a similar background for you, that's not an option. I would also add that voting is not an option, in my view, at least. If you don't vote, think about what's at stake. Think about what you are forfeiting. Think about the power you're giving up. And so my challenge is not to look at the system as a cynic, not to look at things apathetically, but to get engaged. No, you're not going to ever have a candidate that's 100%, in alignment with what you want. When Kennedy got to the White House, the civil rights leaders started to send him pens because he promised on the campaign trail that he would use his pen to sign in civil rights legislation. And so they sent him pens because they thought he couldn't find a pen. so because they thought it took too long. You know, if those folks had the same kind of viewpoint, we may not have the Civil Rights Act of 64 or 65. We may not have the Voting Rights Act. We may not have the Fair Housing Act of 1968. So I implore you to take this seriously. I thank each of you for being a part of this panel. This was an amazing discussion. Thank you, Ariana. Thank you, Nate. Jaquez McCall, I wish you the best on your candidacy in representing the city of Florence, South Carolina. Chris, thank you so much for all that you do in the political arena in Pennsylvania, the State House of Representatives. Amethyst, you and I still at Howard Law. This is our last year coming up. Thank you so much for being a part of this panel. I want to thank each of you for what you've contributed in the end. I also want to thank Cassandra. She'll see the end of this later, I'm sure. Thank you so much for being a part of this discussion and what, the role that you've played in the political field as well. Let's pay attention as we're entering this final phase of the election. Stakes are too high not to. With that being said, I just want to thank you each again. And also want to give a shout out. Please follow the Black Girl Politico on Instagram. Great Instagram account. Very informative. Very, just follow the account. It's a great account. And please follow Chikwez T. McCall on Facebook. His candidacy, I think, is an exciting one. He's actually relying very heavily on social media, which I think is a good thing. So go ahead and follow him. See if he's worthy of your vote. I'm sure he is. And make your vote accordingly. With that being said, I thank you all. I wish you all a good night. And I want to invite those who are watching to tune next Thursday at 7 p.m. as we have a 4th edition of the Political Mic. Thank you so much.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.